key things we do is in building.
Right.
I mean, that's what we do. We tend to be in the city center of, London, New York, with fiber. In the case of London, we have access to about 80,000, 100,000 streetscape furniture around London with fiber connected underneath, where we can put small stuff, which is also a very good way to give indoor coverage to these places. But we obviously deploy DAS in very specific area, and that goes as some of the big buildings you see in London, but also obviously shopping malls and areas like that where you need indoor connectivity, and you can't really rely on what's coming from the macro network of our customers. So.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. I'm going to last week I started talking and then our guest just sort of piped up without me announcing. So I'm going to try and make a point of announcing special guests before I get into the sort of talking bollocks initial phase of the pod. So I'm delighted to say we've got Igor Leprince. Is that how I pronounce it?
I'm very impressed. Yeah, it's not bad.
I've been learning
much worse.
And you are CEO of Boldyn. Is it Boldyn Networks?
Yeah, Boldyn Networks.
Boldyn Networks.
Absolutely.
So we're going to get into what Boldyn is, because while it's a fairly sort of major company within telecoms, it's very much in the B2B space, so some people might not be familiar with it. Mm-hmm. So we can get into that. But welcome,
Thank you.
Igor. So you're from France, yeah?
As you cannot guess from my accent, absolutely.
Well, I wouldn't. But I was about to say I wouldn't guess it from your first name.
That's true.
Is Igor quite a common name?
It is not a common name, and I have no Russian blood. But it's a short story. If you have time, I'll tell you.
Go on then.
Yeah. So the Prince Igor, or Le Prince Igor, is the name of an opera from Borodin that my father used to love. So that's why he called me Igor. And
I see.
Subsequently, I studied Russian and all of that. But that's a short story. So that's why I'm called Igor. And you're right. It's not a typical French name at all.
Right.
It's like Baceno.
Baceno is not a typical name of anything, which is English, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And I'm called Scott, but I've hardly ever been to Scotland. So there we are. I've got to say one other thing before we
but
get...
your Scottish accent is spot on.
Well, I practice it with Neil McRae, who we had on last week. And actually, that's funny. Pierre did a funny trailer where I sort of did the accent out like Neil McRae, and he just sort of laughed it off, and then Pierre cut in a bit from Train Spotting in the trailer. I don't know why you picked the bit where Begbie kicks someone in the bollocks.
I just thought it was funny. You know what? I wanted to pick something, but it's so foul, like everything.
Yeah.
So it was really hard to find.
That's
I was
true.
Like, yeah, just a scream was good. Yeah,
that's true. It's a very obscene film.
Yeah.
Great book for anyone who hasn't read it, and written in phonetic Scottish, so it's quite challenging.
Irving Welsh, isn't that?
Yeah, it's Irving Welsh. And it's one of the few times I've ever read something where they actually write the phonetic accent. Like the one that always jumps out is like bottle. It's based in Edinburgh, so maybe it applies to all Scots. It's a bottle, and he writes it Boatil instead of the normal spelling.
He does it quite well. You get into it after a while.
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
See it in your head.
Oh yeah, you end up
head.
walking around sounding like Neil McRae once you finish reading it.
Speaking of wattle,
yeah. And so we've got to say that Igor. While his name's not typically French, his tastes in alcohol are.
That's correct.
In fact, you actually don't drink beer at all.
I don't drink beer at all.
You've lived in England for 25 years.
That's right.
And you were just telling us earlier that...
I refuse to drink
beer. Yeah, you just dug your heels in.
That's right.
You just arrived.
French man.
25 years. I'm fucking French. I drink wine, innit? Or a bit of Calvados or cognac or something.
Exactly. I drink beer on my own when nobody watches.
There we are. and you're saying that the choices 25 years down the line are a lot better now than they were when you first arrived.
That's right. Yeah.
But
that's why I brought some French beer for you.
Yes, well, you're calling this French beer. Looks like an excellent bottle. Chateauneuf du Pape, which I know enough about wine to know is a quite a posh Côte d'Rône region. So that's very generous. Thank you very much. We'll split it, Ian. One day we'll just do it.
When the bottle,
just do that instead of the beer.
Yeah.
You know when the bottle is embossed that it's legit. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that does look legit, and it's even got some upside down writing on the back, which I don't quite understand. But there we are. Thanks a lot for that, Igor. That's
pleasure.
I'll put it down here.
Yeah, I thought I was going to enjoy a glass of it, but clearly not. So,
well, we did think of it, but then we thought we'll have to drink the whole bottle. Then if we open it, we didn't want to waste it.
We even have a bottle opener here.
We don't have a corkscrew, I don't think. No.
There must be one in the kitchen.
See, I was going to say you can tell it's posh because it's got a cork in it and not a screw top. But yeah, so thanks a lot for that. What else have we got to talk about? So we did the last pod a day early because I was going off on a nice romantic weekend with Mrs. Telecoms.com in Venice, which originally came about because I sort of dug up some Avios air miles. I suddenly realised I had enough for a return flight to Venice. Even going business on the way out, cattle class on the way back. That's
very nice, isn't it?
Yeah, so we turned up early and made full use of the club class lounge, and and Venice is brilliant. I mean, it's one of those places where there's this old joke where they say no one goes there anymore; it's too crowded. Which is obviously deliberately sort of self-contradictory thing to say, but there's quite a lot of times people don't go to places because they think it'll be too touristy, but Venice is big enough and it's got enough little side streets and little canals and all that stuff.
I think you went at a good time.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the weather wasn't great. The final day, it was fucking biblical.
Did you propose again?
No, I didn't do anything much more. We did go on a gondola though, which cost a romantic amount of money.
Do you know what I was impressed about is that you got a chance to do some telecom stuff while you were there. You did a full assessment of the different networks and what they were like for roaming.
I know. I was just running.
And
how
you
sad I am.
posted on it on Facebook.
So I put a thing on Facebook, and Ian just put a thing up going, making me hungry. Ian wasn't asking about telecoms, and this is what I replied to Ian. I went, FYI, Tim is by far the best roaming in Venice, then Trey, then Iliad, then Vodafone. And basically the way it worked is if you were on Tim, you got 5G. If you're on Trey, you got 4G. If you're on Iliad, you got H+. And if you're on Vodafone, you got fucking Edge. Ooh. So who did EE choose to default me to roam on? Let's see if we can guess. And I can confirm that Edge, you might as well not bother.
Yeah, you're going to get a certain person from the PR department getting in touch with you after this, who watches all of them. Going,
yeah. Well, I'm sorry, person from EE's PR department, but no, actually, I have got a question. This obviously isn't a matter for UK PR at all, but there doesn't seem to be, or at least as I anecdotally experienced in Venice, there's no mechanism for making you roam onto the best available network.
Nope.
So yeah, actually, you might be able to shed some light on this. So
I'm not sure. But try me.
But yeah, there are roaming agreements, and we know we've got specialist roaming companies like Bix and that sort of thing that get involved in this area. And presumably there's different commercial arrangements. And my default assumption, this isn't based on anything, this is just my assumption, is that it defaulted to Vodafone because that's the most advantageous business arrangement that EE's got with them. But maybe there's other reasons.
Did it flip between networks?
You should not. Yeah.
It did. I used to try, but it
if you lose it, yeah.
It most frequently went onto Vodafone. I even tried turning off. Turning off my network and turning it on again. But no, it would just flit around. And sometimes my wife's on EE. I even pay the same bill.
Yeah.
And sometimes she'd be on a different network to me.
But presumably, if you're a Vodafone Spain customer, and I mean these are two markets that they're leaving, obviously. But if you're a Vodafone Spain customer and you go to Vodafone Italy, you'd be on the Vodafone network. You would have thought. But I have heard stories about people on networks where it's a group, and you go to another market where they own a network there, and it goes on another network, which seems really odd.
We should probably get someone on from a roaming outfit and go, what the fuck's going on? But God, it was frustrating because, I mean, it shouldn't have been. It's quite sad that I cared because I'm in one of the most beautiful cities in the world and I'm obsessing about what kind of mobile broadband I got. So I've got to hold my hands up for being being a bit tragic there. No, I'm just being a typical person of our times where, I'm just addicted to my smartphone and perhaps oversharing. But yes, so there was that.
Looked like you had a nice meal involving lots of seafood.
Yeah, that was lush. No, food there's great. The people are really cool, actually, considering it's sometimes when you go to a really touristy place, the people who live there get a bit jaded and they sort of take you for granted. But no, they were charming. They were all really cool. And we found there's this one bit. We stayed in an area of the sort of northern part of the main island called Cannaregio, and we found that there was just this one strip where there's all these cool bars and restaurants, but it wasn't in the middle of all the touristy bit. So part of the point of being a tourist is to feel superior to other tourists, isn't it? You want to feel like you're going to the bits that just the normal hoi polloi, the normal proles don't know about.
You found the real Venice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're proper tourists, not you fucking, not you zombies over in St Mark's Square. So that was really nice. So anytime people are going to Venice, I recommend that. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's in.
Well, you've ruined
kind
it
of
now.
Yeah. And went on a nice gondola trip. We also watched a TV program just before we went there called Somebody Feed Phil, which is on Netflix, which is this quite amusing, smiley American guy just going around places and checking out the food. And we went to a couple of those places, one of which was a coffee place on that strip I was just talking about. But yeah, on the whole, totally recommend it. Go there. Perhaps it is best not to go like in the middle of school holidays if you can. But I was... it was everything I thought it would be, and then also I was pleasantly surprised how you can get lost in little alleyways and little canals and all that sort of thing, and not feel like you're in one of the most sort of tourist visited places in the world. So that was all that. It was all jolly good. Anyone else been up to anything? You been anywhere nice, Ian?
No, just been hanging around at home. I haven't had any fun trips. I haven't even had any work trips. Oh, I've been out to. I did go to an event this week.
Okay, what was that?
Or was it last week? No, I think it was. No, it was last week. FutureNet. I've talked about.
Oh, that was you talked about it last week. And that's where that was where Howard Watson won.
That shows how little I've done this
one
week.
techie of the year.
I'm remembering it as last week.
Okay,
No
well then.
Sales Forum. No.
I didn't go to. There was a small
exchange.
sales forum event this week, which, as I understand it, Gabriel Brown, our colleague, went to, and some other people we know. But I think that event's getting, from what I've heard, they're going to get in touch now and say no, attendance was up, but I think it's kind of got smaller over the years. It just seems like other people are doing the small cells thing. So, anyway, we can talk about small cells, can't we?
Well, we can. It may well be relevant. That leads us on to ending the initial talking bollocks phase of the pod. And on to you, Igor. So as I alluded to at the start, Boldyn's a major player in telecom space, but it might not be one that everyone's familiar with. So why don't you just give us a top line? What does it do? A little bit of history and all that sort of thing, and then we'll just start. We'll just start sort of improvising from there.
Absolutely. So we are, as you said, we are one of the largest, digital infrastructure. I think in this podcast we can call that neutral host provider of infrastructure around the world. So when I say around the world, is we have operation in Hong Kong, UK, which is our headquarter, rest of Europe, in particular Italy, and US, which is our biggest market. And what we do, we provide connectivity to a lot of different places, generally pretty tough places or places where it's hard to bring connectivity. So I'm sure we'll talk about it, but the Tube in London is one of our biggest projects, for example. We do the same in New York, in Hong Kong, in San Francisco, in Seattle. So transport, tube system, subway system is a big part of what we do. But we also bring connectivity in sports, stadium, venue, enterprise, ports, airports, mines.
So is that a big part
of all that?
The business model for neutral host is sort of filling the gaps that the main mobile network operators haven't filled, or is?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'll call it that way. I mean, some of the examples I just gave you are clearly areas where you need one provider. You're not going to, but many others, of course, you cannot install full system, and you will not install full system in the Tube. So you need one person that install one system that can be shared by everyone. It's going to be the same on small cell and other area. Now, I think the business model is to, it's obviously a lot cheaper to do that. It's frankly the only way to do it in the area like the Tube. It's better for the environment, better for a lot of things, frankly. But you share basically the DC infrastructure between in the UK the four operators.
And then there's just clever technology whereby whoever your provider is, you can just jump on that neutral host.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 8 data centers around London that connect these 140 stations, 200 tunnels. They bring there, and then the operators meet us in this 8 base station hotel or data center. And
base
then
station hotel.
Base station hotel. That's quite.
That's
I always like
that's
that word.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a lot posher than data center, although that's what it is. And the operator
meet
us there.
Meet at the bar and have a drink after a long day of providing connectivity.
Try and pull each other.
Yeah, maybe I can convince you to come and visit one of our base stations. Yeah. Although to be clear, it's a data center, but yeah.
So that project's now that's still ongoing. I'm guessing that build out. But it's quite new. That's quite new, yeah. Because
it's ongoing.
Some lines it's good at the moment, and some it's
Sure, and I can give you a little bit of a just headline of where we are. So you see connectivity right now in the Jubilee line that's been existing for a while. We are upgrading that to 5G. You see connectivity on the Central line, on part of the Northern line. And part of the Elizabeth line. Then we're going to add a few more stations in Victoria and Bakerloo line in the next few months. So if you think end of June will be about So we think about venues. So that's a station and a tunnel is a venue for us. So we have about 350 venues, so 150 stations, 200 tunnels to cover the whole network.
Okay.
And about 30% of that will be covered by the end of June. And that's about 50% of the footfall of this. So because we're covering the central London first, by the end of the year, we'll be at more than 50% of that, 55%. That's going to be about 75-80% of the footfall, and then the rest in the rest of 2025. So the whole network will be covered by the second part of 2025.
And all the operators are involved in...
And all the operators, so yeah, every station we launch are with the 4 operators. So they are we have a contract with the 4 operators, and they tend to launch at the same time as we launch a station, sometimes with a couple of days difference. But
they quite often do individual press releases, trying to make it sound like it's just their bright idea, which always makes me laugh.
Yeah.
Like, whoever now offers connectivity in Paddington or whatever.
Yeah.
Why is it taking so long?
It's a good question. I don't take it wrong, but why it takes so long?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily pointing the finger at you guys.
And I wish it was easier. Well, first of all...
So I'm sure I've been writing about this for a long time.
We actually started the project about a year and a half ago, but the
broader concept of connectivity on the underground and that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the I guess part of the Jubilee line was really a sort of pilot that was run. But the reality is the concession was, so London was a bit behind. So you argue when this network is deployed, it will be one of the most advanced network in the world. But today, it's probably the only city of this size in the world where there is no connectivity.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. There is connectivity everywhere. I mean,
so let's see how indiscreet you feel like being. Whose fault is that?
Whose fault is that? It's difficult to say. It took some time to take the decision to that. I mean, it takes a lot of time to deploy the networks. I mean, I'm not into the detail of why this concession was decided 2 years ago as opposed to 4 years ago or 5 years ago.
That's my gut feel. It's a planning sort of bureaucracy thing.
And look, back to your question, which is probably the part I can definitely comment on, is the tube only stopped for 3.5 hours every night. So if you look at what we do, you sit outside a station, you wait for the grid to close, then you go in, generally around midnight.
Small window. You
go down, you bring all the equipment and all that, so you lose half an hour. And then by 4 o'clock, you need to be out of the place where they're about to restart. Of course, a lot of safety that goes with it. So, every night we have 400 or 500 people down for 3.5 hours. And that's it. That's it. And you need to, we need to put about 400 kilometers of leaky feeder across all the tunnels. And that's what we do. And that's why it takes time.
Leaky feeder?
Yeah, I mean, fiber leaky feeder. That's how you propagate the signal.
That's when
I've never heard that phrase. Leaky feeder.
That's when the equipment's had too much to drink at the base station hotel.
Yeah, pretty much coming from a base station hotel. So, that's a story. So that's why it's a fascinating project. And you've been in the tube, I'm sure. It's.
No, I noticed I can get it more places now. But
but it's also 100 years old, right? So you need to find places where you can put a 8,000, low power.
But what's in it for the operators? Because, and I guess this applies to...
Because they don't charge a premium.
Because they don't make any extra money. And then I guess they're just going, well, nobody else is doing it because they regard it as too expensive. And then they presumably have to pay, you're not doing it for charitable reasons. So there's obviously some kind of commercial deal. But it just seems like it's more spend for them. And then they always complain about not making extra money because they can't... they can't grow the customer base anymore and they can't charge for extra usage, really. It's all you can eat. So,
sure. I mean, look, you could argue on that for anything. Any pound that you deploy in the networks, that's to provide, better services, better connectivity.
It's customer experience.
And customer experience. So, whether you are able to charge more, I mean, that's their prerogative, for sure. I mean, what's important for them is, and what's important for the city, what's important for the country is, it's safety. It's obviously having access to the connectivity in a place where people tend to spend 25, 30 minutes of their day and at any time of the day.
You want to use it, isn't it? Because you're sitting down on your arse and you might want to get your phone out. Then
when you think of the amount of people, like you look at the tube, mercifully, we don't have to commute. We work from home nearly all the time. In fact, the only time we come into the office normally is for this.
I do use the tube quite a bit, though, going to meetings and things.
Cool. So when you go on the tube rush hour, it's just mental.
I try and avoid doing it at rush hour.
And just, it is amazing when you think about it, the sheer number of people that are just sat on there for minutes or hours per day. That's obviously, when it's really rammed, you're not going to do too much productive. You'd be lucky, you'd be sitting there with your phone right up against your face. But there's definitely an argument for productivity. And the same goes for trains as well.
Yep.
Which I also think we're not great on connectivity on.
No, it's a very
trains.
difficult area. Obviously, it's a lot of rural areas, tunnels. Again, we're talking about.
Yeah.
But back to what you were saying, though. I think what you are doing when you are in the tube, I mean, there is an element of safety. I mean, we have plenty of people that are telling us they don't feel safe because you're in the tube. You can't contact anyone.
Yeah.
You can't say to somebody, I'm coming, I'm 10 minutes away. You will be able to say that when you get out. You can't necessarily plan your next journey, for example, catching your train.
Yeah.
You have to have the connectivity to do that. So there is a lot of that goes with it. And by the way, this network we're deploying is also part of the emergency network for the country as well. So in the future, that will be used also by emergency services as well. So
do you do sort of other in-building coverage as well? Because it's pretty bad, isn't it, to go inside some buildings, even in central London, because of the spectrum, you can't really get a good signal. And I know that's something that.
I have to get on the guest Wi-Fi here.
Absolutely.
I mean, that sounds like something that people in neutral hosts have started to get into a little bit, doing in-building systems. And,
Absolutely. I mean, I was going to list you probably in a boring way all the things we do, but one of the key things we do is in building. Right. I mean, that's what we do. We tend to be in the city center of London, New York, with fiber. In the case of London, we have access to about 80,000, 100,000 streetscape furniture around London with fiber connected underneath, where we can put small cell, which is also a very good way to give indoor coverage to these places. But we obviously deploy DAS in very specific area, and that goes as some of the big buildings you see in London, but also obviously shopping malls and areas like that where you need indoor connectivity, and you can't really rely on what's coming from the macro network of our customer. So we do that for them. We do that for the building owners as well. So
and you own the infrastructure, because I remember being up in Scotland a few weeks ago with this 3 project, which is very much at the kind of trial stage, small cell stuff, and they were talking then about Boldyn's involvement in that. They're the owner of the kind of assets, but is that? Because it sounds like the markets you're in, it sounds like you would own a lot of it, or is it kind of leased from? Are you working with kind of public authorities to some extent?
And I think one of our strengths and one of the things we have been doing for years is being able to work in the sort of PPP environment. So we work with the public, and in the case of TfL, obviously we have access to that as part of the transaction. So we bring to the operator the capacity to say, well, we can put an equipment on that, whether we obviously don't own this street furniture, whether we own we typically have the fiber that goes to that, whether we own the equipment or not, and then bring that to the party basically. So one of the difficulty in dense urban environment where if you believe today that there is not a single macro site that you can put additional site you can put in London, so everything is going to be a small cell. Is you need to find a location. You need to have fiber access to that, and you need to be able to deploy it in this sort of very difficult environment where even to put a small cell, you need to block a street at night, right? So I think that's what makes it, very difficult to deploy. Also,
it sounds like the more. I mean, this is the direction of travel, isn't it? Because when we were talking all the time at the moment this year about the investment challenges the industry's in of trying to invest in new macro sites when revenues aren't growing and the equipment's expensive and. We need to densify to some extent through things small cells, but it can only realistically be done through a kind of shared infrastructure basis. And the analogy gets drawn with things like railway lines to some extent. You wouldn't build 4 railway lines next to each other. I mean, you can't build 4 railway lines, but which you can to some extent in networks. But it still seems like a wasted investment to some extent.
I mean, it's obviously far too expensive for sure, but also would you have a city allowing 4 small cells in a corner of a corner of a street? I mean, you need to be able to put several on the same pole. I mean, again, you need to have access to the fiber, otherwise that's not going to provide the 5G experience that you want. Digging 10 meters of street is extremely expensive. So that's basically. So
what you're using some of the ducts that have been opened up by people like OpenReach and the pole.
So we're using that, but not more than that. So again, this project is connectivity in the tube, cellular connectivity in the tube. That's Wi-Fi. That's also on the red route fiber networks that we have that connects these. Street furniture where we can put small cells. So the concession for these, let's call it 100,000 street furniture where you can put small cell, and that's the emergency network. That's basically what the project is. What's visible to the consumer is coverage in the in the tube. But in reality, that's what the concession is about, and that's what we do, which is pretty much what we do as a company.
And what's the biggest kind of market in terms of the, not necessarily geographically, but the biggest kind of opportunity? I mean, is it the tube stuff, or is it something else?
I mean, it's a big part of what we do. I think for us, the element of indoor coverage and venues and enterprise. And by the way, back to what you were saying on operators, that's an areas of where we believe governments, but enterprise needs also should not have the expectation that operators can continue to invest, dollars and pounds into indoor coverage, that they also need to do that. And that's what we're saying. We're saying enterprise, we're saying entertainment venue, we're saying shopping mall, we are saying stadium, we're saying football team. Wanted to make sure that there is experience, and you cannot just expect the 4 operators to come and deploy that. And by the way, in a lot of these places, you don't have the space also for all 4 operators to come and deploy. So that's a mix of neutral hosts, but also instead of expecting operators to spend the money, enterprise government needs to do part of it.
It seems to me that if you were starting from scratch, if you're starting a whole country's mobile network from scratch,
it probably wouldn't be done the same way now.
You'd actually want the whole thing to be neutral host.
You might.
I mean, there are obviously plenty of reasons why you don't want it in terms of market dynamics and competition and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have places that are a bit more centralised. Like
then it looks like OpenReach in the old days, doesn't it? Then
or you have a state-run thing, and there's obviously all sorts of interesting things that come with that. Actually, a little tangent there. I just noticed in my news feed that the Labour, who are almost certain to win the next general election, say they're going to renationalise the trains.
I saw that.
And, I would...
Within 5 years.
And the broadband.
Within 5 years. Did they say they're going to nationalise? No.
That was the previous guy.
Right, yeah.
Was
that Corbyn?
Well, I think Neil was alluding to it, wasn't he, when he was on last week?
Right.
That whole sort of...
Nationalise
they talked about putting BT back
BT.
under national ownership again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with the trains, it's more viable in economic sense because they only give the private providers licenses, so they're just going to not renew that license.
It's a natural monopoly that you can't really do.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of the track, you can't possibly have 4 parallel.
Well,
lines,
so that's where I think it's an interesting one. Like, my publicised instincts to be against state ownership and in favour of that. But when you've got a natural monopoly like that, and given that I don't think anyone thinks that private ownership of the trains has been an unalloyed success, in terms of prices and reliability and that sort of thing. It'll be interesting because the last time the state was in charge of the trains was like in the 70s, and we've all quite rightly got all kinds of dystopian associations with the 70s and everything decaying and generally being shite.
It's better like that now.
Well, but it will be interesting. There's a part of me that wants to see him give it a go.
I'm joking, obviously.
I've just got to mute my phone.
And by the way, you're talking about sharing. Sharing exists between operators today, right? They share towers. They obviously have 2 tower sharing. This shared rural network is a network sharing. So it's happening. It's happening, and that's the only way to make it viable. Yeah.
Well, and it does make more sense to have just one really good network that everyone taps
you probably
into.
Want some kind of balance between the extremes, don't you? Because I was talking to my colleague Teresa, who's actually somewhere else in the office at the moment, about this report came out from Point Topic last week about the altnets in the UK and how they're doing versus OpenReach and what the share of homes passed is now and what take up. So it's a really good report for stats. But they were noting, and I think some analysts were noting, that some homes now have sort of five fibre lines as an option. And Teresa was saying, well, what happens to all the other fibre lines? And it's just unused unless someone changes. Yeah. And you've got the option of changing. But she was like, well, it just sounds like a colossal waste of investment to build, 5 overlapping networks. And that's kind of, it's too much, isn't it? But you don't want one.
Yeah, because there is still redundancy.
So you probably want 2 or 3 carrier neutral networks across the country, ideally, or something. And then you can have... That's how I think it would be done if they were designing it from scratch.
Yeah, from scratch, if you were starting from scratch.
But,
and the competition when this operator launched 25 years ago, so the network was a massive differentiator, right? And I know they probably still market that, but it's less and less the case as well.
But do you see a role for Boldyn going further out of the sort of hard to serve areas, like the tubes and doing stuff in these weird tunnels and things like that, and actually being somebody that does? I mean, Orange and Vodafone, I think, were doing this thing in Romania with Open RAN, where they're talking about it being a lot easier to just have one base station, and you can put different software tracks on that basically and share it. And it sounds like there's a big opportunity for neutral host guys to get in and do something. And
I'm not sure the market is really ready for that. I mean, there are pilots of that. So, but going beyond the tube and all of that, we are, because as I said, I gave you half a dozen examples, but really, especially in the US where this neutral host concept is very well adopted. Really, the connectivity in most of these places are provided as a neutral host as well. So, a lot further than we see. I mean, Europe is probably the most advanced country in Europe, and in the rest of Europe, we believe that's a concept that's going to also, very often in Europe, it's one of the operators that act as a neutral host. But even that is not easy, right?
Yeah.
That is not easy.
It sounds like you were saying a lot of your work's in Italy. In particular,
what we do in Italy is pretty much almost a copy and paste of London in the smaller scales.
Right.
In the smaller scale. So it's basically a Wi-Fi network for the whole city. A vision from the mayor to say, I want to have free public Wi-Fi in the main 80 squares and the whole city.
Public Wi-Fi is generally shite. So that could definitely do with improving. It could be that the infrastructure there and just the way in which it's presented to the end user isn't good.
Yeah, I mean, again, you need to put investment into that, and the problem is that by definition, having a free public Wi-Fi. So if it's free for you and I, then who is paying for it? So you've got a mayor in Rome that says, I'm going to use funds to pay for that because I want that to be part of it. So you need to have vision on that, and then of course, then you use that to do other things and potentially monetize that. But somebody needs to do that. I mean, I was looking last night. We are running the biggest public Wi-Fi network in the world, which is in New York. That's 15 million people that use the Wi-Fi. And it's pretty good, but it's been an investment that has been made. And by the way, 15 million is more than the number of people living in New York. So obviously it's all the tourists. So that's a number of people that have registered on this network over the last 10 years. But that's real public Wi-Fi. And by the way, we run a lot of things on that. So
I wonder what it can support capacity-wise at a given moment, like how many people. Because sometimes when you get, like this always used to be a moan among tech journalists, is you go to a press conference. Let's say it's a press conference that had just 100 hacks journalists in it, and then they'd have some Wi-Fi, and it just wouldn't cope. Mm-hmm. So there's obviously, I think that's what a lot of people, even people like us who've been writing about it for a while, let alone just regular consumers, don't realise how much capacity needs to be sort of fine-tuned.
Sure.
You have to. You have to build in capacity.
Yeah.
And how many, like in New York, do you reckon how many people do you think it could handle at a given moment?
Yeah, I mean, in New York, this is the Link NYC kiosks. So you don't know if you see them around. The small kiosks we are now, this Link 5G, which are 4 or 5 times the size that bring cellular coverage. What we have in New York, we have fiber on each of these kiosks. So you've got really significant capacity, and obviously
fiber straight to the router or whatever.
Yeah,
it is.
fiber straight to this cabinet, to this Link NYC cabinet. So you could obviously handle Times Square and all that. This network can give you some data.
It's like a phone box.
That's why, by the way, BT does that here. Yeah. But you can also from that potentially do private network in the future or give through fixed wireless access to an enterprise that, for example, is in is in the vicinity of that or shop that can use this Wi-Fi for their, to run what they have to run with this network as well. So
it sounds like you've got there's a lot of technologies that you're in. Some neutral host companies are much more specific. We do sort of 4G or 5G, but you're covering lots of different bases, aren't you? Which means you require quite a lot of tech expertise in different areas inside the company. But
we have to, literally.
Has it just evolved that way naturally, and you started out with one because it was Australian, wasn't it? The original company.
We didn't talk about that, but and the roots in Australia are broadcast roots, so it's a completely different world to what we are talking about here.
Okay.
But yes, we've had, obviously we are dealing with DAS network, obviously cellular network, Wi-Fi, but in Sunderland, we have also low-RAN network. So absolutely, we need to do that. Just as a reminder, we're a neutral host. We're also completely agnostic. So we don't provide technology. We rely on technology, on the best technology in the market from our suppliers. So that's also that's why it's also important to us. So we are able to go to, to a project like Rome or to a TfL or to a stadium and say, that's the technology we recommend you deploy on that. And generally, by the way, we work with the operators on that, but that's what we also do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to know how, to what extent there's a build it and they will come aspect, to what extent it's bespoke where people say we have this connectivity challenge and we want you to solve it. In other words, which comes first? Do Do you only respond to demand, or do you sometimes just build things in anticipation of demand?
It's an interesting one. I would say when you think about, and we can talk more about, if you think about private network, we typically go and respond to demand. And demand goes as far as these are the use cases, this is the issue we have. So therefore, we need solution to do that, right? And generally, by the way, these use cases also solve a problem that justify the investment, right? So on the private network, that tends to be like that. We're not going to go and say, well, do you mind if we build a private network here and we'll see
if you fancy it.
See if you fancy it. Now, if you would argue that when we signed the concession with TfL, for example, we have had discussion with the operators, but until they sign the concession and you build, it's difficult to sell what you have not done, right? So when we go to a stadium, for example, we have a good knowledge that the operators in the country are interested in providing, have a need, by the way. So, i.e., they don't provide already coverage, and therefore we build with an understanding that the operators will join the network. But there is an element of risk in what we do, by the way. Yeah. And I didn't talk about it, but that's also why we are backed by a big pension fund, the Canadian pension plan, because it's a significant investment. I mean, to be a neutral host and do that, you need to significantly
everything to do with telecoms is big capex intensive.
It is capex intensive, and you're solving the problem from the operators, which lack capex. Yeah. If you're unable to invest yourself and wait for the operators to give you the capex, then this project don't get.
What's business like at the moment? I know you can't sort of share actual numbers probably, but what's the kind of sales performance like? And I was
going to ask similar to that.
Sure.
What the direction of travel for your total available market is? Is it growing? So it's part of that.
Sure.
Question.
So I mean, we've been very lucky to win a lot of business, and as I said, we acquired 6, 7 companies in the last few years. The last one in the US is on the higher education part, Apogee. So we've been growing probably half organically with projects like as I mentioned, like Rome or BART in San Francisco or TfL, and the rest has been done through acquisition. And our business is growing because the neutral host concept is growing. I think what needs to happen in our environment, like our customer is, where can we convince government, where can we convince enterprise that investment in connectivity is not only you cannot only expect that from the mobile operator.
Yeah.
And
increasingly
I think that's an important part, because a lot of this project, whether it's rail you talk about, whether it's Rome that I talk about, if there is not an impulse or an investment, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. Just the business case is just not there, and the operators, especially in Europe, are struggling.
Yeah.
So but still, it's not immediately obvious why, if it's not economically viable for them to invest in that infrastructure, why it is for you.
Well, it is not for them individually.
Yeah,
it is obviously a lot more economical.
So it's the neutral host model that makes it all.
And there is an element of risk. So, i.e., if the 3 operators are joining or 2 operators in joining, obviously that's a different, certainly a different return for us. So there is an element of risk of doing that. But yes, I mean, that's the neutral host model for sure. Yeah, but the investment in the case of Rome, the investment from the city or investment from a train operators, for example, in that helps to bridge the gap to a business case.
And talking about, sorry mate, just a quick one. Talking about the total available market, there does seem to be a general trend that I'm thinking about of stories that we've written over the last few years of, certainly in Europe, of operators selling some of their stuff and then getting that same thing from a third-party provider. Like one company, it's sort of calmed down a little bit, but in recent years, Cellnex was just buying up like towers like crazy. Mm-hmm. And I believe that you even bought something from Cellnex. Is that right?
Yeah, we bought their private network
business. So there's companies like yours, companies like Cellnex, and other telecoms providers that are, for want of a better term, vendor neutral. I.e., they've got some infrastructure, but they're not attached to any particular telecoms group. That seems to be a sort of growing trend. Do you see that, at least in Europe, anyway?
Yeah, and I think what you talk about the tower is nothing else than sharing infrastructure. That's also on the basis of, yes, I take these towers from you, but I monetize these towers as well and share them with other operators. I mean, that has been also the basis. By the way, that's the basis in the UK as well of Cornerstone and others. So absolutely, the business case has been that. Obviously, there's been other reasons why operators have offloaded their tower to repay debt and aspects like that, right? Which is less the case in our case, of course.
It's selling your house and becoming a tenant, Scott.
Yeah, well, Ian and I have spoken about it a lot, and it was just interesting to...
Well,
it's interesting to sort of stress test that analogy with someone who's right on the coal face of it.
I'm wondering how far that goes. Just it's not much of a tangent, but they've sold. There's been a lot of tower divestments, and some of those units are. I think Telefónica's gone quite full in on it, and they're owned by American Tower now. I think most of their assets, but others have kind of kept a majority stake in those businesses. But then they're looking at and then Telecom Italia is the big one, obviously, that's looking at a major divestment of its whole fixed line. And there's growing talk about, I think Cellnex now has gone to actually renting out active infrastructure as well, hasn't it? It owns base stations, and you could see a model perhaps where the operators don't even buy the active equipment from Ericsson anymore. Maybe it's somebody like Boldyn
or Nokia,
or Nokia,
and where Igor used to work.
And then you have, that model then is the operators just being service companies, really customer service companies, I guess. Can you see it going that way in the future?
I mean, look, it's a possible trend. I think it's not a trend we've seen really actively around. I think there's been a lot of talk about that. It's absolutely possible, and some of the neutral hosts we just discussed is actually a version of that. It's generally more in area where there is no other solution, and frankly not. But if the trend continue, i.e. the operators continue in the current trend, I think it's going to be more and more of that, of course.
Well, it does seem like the advance of like private equity and maybe even the hyperscalers to some extent with data centers that can support telco functions into the telco market. So because we're always going to need the networks, it's just who is it who owns them and how do the models work that seems to be in flux at the moment. I think
the horror of being in Venice and being on Vodafone Italia's Edge network makes you realise we take sort of ubiquitous connectivity for granted a bit.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it's only when you don't get it. It'd be one thing if I was just been in, on the top of a mountain in Tuscany or something like that. But in the middle of a city to not be able to get it was remarkable. So sort your shit out, Vodafone Italia.
Do you find...
it happens in all the city, by the way. It happens in London, it happens in New York, it happens everywhere. Because obviously our data consumption are going up, and the networks are not necessarily coping with that, right?
Do you find there's do you ever hear concerns? Because I suppose one of the arguments against the the carrier neutral model is it becomes harder to differentiate from your rivals. If you take pride in the fact that you've got the best 5G network in the country and we can provide higher speed services because we've made these investments in infrastructure, and then it's all on one set of infrastructure that's provided by, it might be Boldyn or it might be somebody else. Do they worry about that? I mean, the Tube's a good example, isn't it? Because everybody's basically providing the same level of service, I'm guessing, on that system. No one's getting an advantage over anybody else.
Yeah, I would say yes, although each operators have a different spectrum.
Yep.
So that could also define to put different amount of spectrum in the Tube or anywhere else for that matter.
Right.
So that's a differentiator. Obviously in the Tube you would say, well, if you have a spectrum, you put it there. So, but they all each have a different element of spectrum, and it's what do they do with this network? But that's an element of that. But you see a difference because each operators might have a different way of deploying their spectrum, their equipment, and what they decide to do. I think that would be the different still with a neutral host network.
Is spectrum ownership something that you get involved in at all, or not?
Look, we are not, and definitely that's for our customer to do. But we are in private networks because, of course, CBRS network in the US, or for that matter, in each of the country spectrum in this country. You can have access to spectrum for private networks. So either us or an enterprise would typically have spectrum to deploy a private network.
I was going to ask you about CBRS. What's that kind of... Because I hear it talked about a lot, but I don't really know what's going on in that area in the US market.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we use that spectrum, or I think recently, doing some trial on the 60 gigahertz on part of this link NYC and trying to bring a private network across a city. So these are spectrum that are available, or the spectrum of our customer, the C-band spectrum of our customer, to provide this network. So that's available, and that's available in this country. It's not available. I think it's available in France. It's not available in Italy right now. But each country obviously is opening up this spectrum mainly for enterprise, for private networks.
Do you have a role with because there's countries like Germany that have carved out some of that mid-band spectrum and it's gone straight to industrial groups, hasn't it, I think?
Yeah.
But does that open opportunities as well to do things directly for them rather than working through operators?
Absolutely, it does. And we do,
Right.
whether it's with operators as a partner or directly with the enterprise. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And,
So-
it's going to be the reality across
That's what the
across
Cellnex
Europe,
deal
really, so.
would tie into. The Cellnex private networks deal kind of ties into that specific opportunity. I'm guessing.
That's exactly that.
And
actually.
this is quite a recent one as well. Or-
Yeah, so we closed it a couple of months ago. We announced it 4 or 5 months ago. And again, that's, don't speak on behalf of Cellnet, but them recentering their activities on the tower, which is the majority of the revenue, where what we do, as I said at the beginning, is almost everything but towers, although we have towers in the US and data center, and we do everything else, from fiber to small cell and all that. So.
That's consistent with their public messaging. I mean, to paraphrase them, I think... I can't remember when it was. Maybe at the start of this year, they sort of went, okay, we went a bit mental with the M&A. Now we're going to calm down for a bit. and I think their CEO was like, well, then I'm off because I only like M&A. I'm bored now. Whoever he was,
but he was
Spanish guy.
He was the guy who was there for the M&A.
Yeah, exactly. And so as soon as they said, right, the board went, no, we're not going to be doing any more shopping. He's like, fuck it, I'm off then. I like shopping.
Well, you get your guys in who do the shopping, and then
exactly. Yeah, you get the shopping guy in.
Yeah.
The reality in the last 2 years, the interest rate have been completely different as well.
Yeah,
so if you buy a company and you buy it based on, with debt, of course, not with the cash you generate, then when this debt is going up, you need to find a way to pay for it. And which is not too different to moving away from Cellnex. But the problem of the operators today is that every time they spend a pound, if they get back 0.8, well.
Yeah,
it's difficult, right? So,
we were saying earlier, and by the way, just before I get onto that question, I've got a remark. You may have noticed on the camera that Igor was wearing a hoodie that had Boldyn branding on it.
Yeah,
and he's got a bit hot, so he's taken it off.
It's quite hot in here.
And now he's got a Boldyn t-shirt.
Getting hot, absolutely.
It is quite hot.
Boldyn man.
Yeah, you like it?
A telecom superhero.
That's actually my favorite one. So that's cool. The t-shirt I was wearing the day we launched the brand a year ago. So it's always special. That's why the blue is a bit gone, So
it's all good. It's all good. I was just remarking on your impeccable branding.
Impeccable. I just need some new one. If you can tell my marketing team that that the t-shirt is a bit old.
You're the CEO, aren't you? You've got to get in there and just go away.
Yeah.
I'm appearing on podcasts now. I need new t-shirts.
New t-shirt, exactly.
You're talking about how capex intensive it is. The interest rate environment. Does that affect your business as well?
Yeah, I think it affects everyone. I think we've had the chance to be backed by very good long-term shareholders that don't see an investment at 3 years or 5 years.
Yeah.
Very often internally we joke on the fact and
patient capital
that they call a quarter 25 years, so very different to the company that I used to work with, which means that over a period of 10, 15, 20 years, that has less impact that obviously if you buy an asset to sell it in 3 or 5 years. But, it impacts everyone. Obviously, the cost of money is higher, so it's higher cost for sure.
That has been an interesting thing in recent years, quite how much speculative capital has gone into telecoms infrastructure, especially in the UK in fixed. We've got people like Goldman Sachs involved with City Fibre.
City Fibre is a big one, yeah.
So there's a lot of what sometimes people call patient capital that goes into this stuff, because I guess it's a sure bet. If you own a fibre network,
it's long-term infrastructure funds that don't worry about.
It's not really going to depreciate. It's always going to
30 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the logic. Although, Ian, back to what you were saying, at some point, if 4 or 5 people in a limited area do the same same bet, 1 or 2 are not going to be successful out of that. So then that's where there needs to be an element of consolidation, which has started to happen a little bit in the UK, has started to happen in the US as well.
Yeah.
Because
this week even, wasn't it? Wasn't there a fibre deal this week? Have I mentioned?
Well, T-Mobile US.
T-Mobile,
did their not really the same thing. But they did buy. Was it Lumos?
That's right.
Yeah. We wrote that.
So is because Boldyn's been quite sort of formed of a lot of acquisitions, isn't it? To all intents, but do you see that continuing? It's the market itself that sounds like it could be maybe not ripe for consolidation, but there's certainly opportunities to buy players and expand into new areas.
Well, it used to be called Boldyn before you came up with this funky new brand that you're wearing.
Beautiful T-shirt. BAI Communication was really the brand of our group, which we which is our business in Australia, is still called that. But yes, we bought 6, 7 companies. As I said, half of our growth has come from winning project, and the rest has been us acquiring company and them being successful. I mean, look, scale matters to do these sort of things for sure. I think what we are also bringing to our customers is experience from what we do around the world. I believe one of the reasons we've been successful in London is because we build the tube in Hong Kong and in New York, right? So there was obviously a huge knowledge that we had in operating in this segment. Yeah. When we have partner in the US and we come to this country and say we can do Leeds Arena or Olympia, that's because we've done LA Live and Crypto.com, for example, in the US. So there is an element, of course, of that, of knowledge on that, and an element of scale. Now, will we continue to do M&A? I mean, I've always said, our strategy has never been based on M&A, so I'll continue to say no, but then you will re-invite me in a year and we'll have done 2 M&A, and I thought
you said.
Point me out to the inconsistency. So look, it's we've had the chance to do, great M&A, to be, very often also approached by great funders to take their business. But, I think we have the scale now to continue without M&A. But, if there are things that make sense, especially in new areas, I mean, the example of what we did in the US with Apogee is higher education, a market where we're not. We see a huge potential for outsourcing the market. The needs on universities is huge for technology, given who... Yeah. And, that was a vertical we've been always interested in. We could not crack, and there was this wonderful company that's done that for 25 years, and we decided to buy them.
Makes sense.
Cellnex decided to buy their private network. Private network for me is a big part of my business. They bought a company called Edscom 3 years ago. We are not ready for that. If they were not willing to sell their business, we would have grown this business organically. But it happened that we could do that and accelerate our growth.
Like in that market, the private networks market?
Because that quite often gets spoken about as one of the, we're not quite sure what the point of 5G is yet. But private networks does come up quite a lot, doesn't it? Yeah,
I'm just kind of, because it's been talked about a lot, and you're obviously in a sort of former job at Nokia, and that's been a growing bit of their business. But I think there's also a sense that maybe we've not done as well yet out of private network opportunities as we could do as an industry. And I'm kind of wondering what who's really kind of interested in doing this stuff, and what's the main driver of it? Yeah.
So by the way, Nokia is a partner. That we have on private network go-to-market, but also obviously using their technology.
Chat your old mates.
Yeah, and Ericsson for that matter as well. So right now at the moment there is a lot of traction on that. I mean, obviously we tend to always hype too much anything we do. So we are doing that as we always do. Having said that, it's growing. I mean, this part of the business, I've built 50 private network in the last 4 or 5 years, so it's real, it's there. I think Nokia and Ericsson are probably claiming hundreds of private networks. We've passed also the pilot, so obviously it's very easy to claim a pilot as one reference. I mean, these are really networks where there's a lot of use cases that run on that. These are mines, these are ports, these are hospitals, these are really big places that run significant amount of their operation on that basis and use cases on that. And for us is how do we multiply that? And again, for the industry is additional dollars and pounds that go into connectivity that do not rely only on the telecom operator, which I think is absolutely crucial. Yeah.
And I mean, I guess you've got quite a sort of tech neutral approach to it, whereas some of the players are very keen to push 5G as the option for private networks. But is 5G the main driver of it in terms of? I mean, it can be anything.
5G is not needed for all of these use cases. Yeah. Obviously, when you deploy a network, you would want to have 5G. I mean, why would you deploy 4G, 5G? It could be Wi-Fi, absolutely. In that, so we obviously have the technology that's required. I mean. But it's not everything is 5G, and certainly not everything require 5G, right? Yeah. But if you deploy a network in a
does require 5G? Well, I mean, what's the sort of reason that people would sort of come along and say it has to be? Yeah.
Speed. Well,
you got the fatter pipe. Mm-hmm. You got the fatter pipe.
Yeah, and then if you need a need for connectivity and link to your cellular network as well. So it's all of that. But a lot of these use cases could be done on Wi-Fi, could be done on 4G. Yeah. Wi-Fi in a private network element. A lot of these are obviously secured in a different ways as well. I mean, it's going to depend on the number of sensors or devices that you have on this network, and then you can decide which technology is the best for that, right? So.
Yeah. Sounds like a really competitive space, though, doesn't it? That private altogether, because you've got people like HPE kind of involved in that to some extent with the Aruba stuff. And do you see them kind of in
and Juniper Networks?
Well,
again,
I mean,
these are HPE, Aruba, Juniper, Nokia, Ericsson. These are also partners for us from a technology standpoint as well.
Yeah.
I mean, none of these companies
they're not operators, are they?
Are companies that deploy, design, finance. And operate networks. And nothing wrong. Nokia and Ericsson do that, but they do less and less than that. So
the lines are blurring, but there are still quite big distinctions in terms of the nature of the
seems to me that what you're doing. I'm gonna move it on soon because there's one or two sort of news things that we want to chat about before we run out of time. Pierre's always trying to get me to get it closer to an hour and a half rather than 2 hours as well. That what you do is you seem to fill in a lot of market gaps. Like, there are within telecoms, you're one of those sort of like a sort of chameleon. Like you can be all things to all people depending on what they need. Whereas you'll get like operators who've got a certain priority, and then you've got vendors you were speaking about, they got their thing, and there seems that there will be little market gaps, technological gaps, business case gaps in between that, and it seems that companies like yours fill a lot of those, which is, in terms of a healthy functioning market, you definitely need companies like that. And I'm sure there are examples of companies like that in other markets, like, I don't know, automotive or healthcare or agriculture or whatever. Other verticals, as some people insist on calling. I don't like the term verticals. It's annoying. But
I've used it a few times, so I didn't know I was going to.
Yeah, well,
I'll think of a
really
different
pissed
word
me off
for the rest of the podcast.
No, I just used it myself.
You didn't show it, actually. So.
I just flinched inwardly. No, I just used it myself. I mean, sometimes you just have to make your peace with the sort of corporate speak vernacular, but that doesn't mean I don't reserve the right to bristle every now and then. But yes, so these we used to call verticals industries, didn't we? So I'm not quite sure where vertical came. Well, I know where it came from, fucking America, isn't it? Like most of this corporate speak. But yeah, I'm sure that's the case in lots of other industries, and I think it's really good. That's what entrepreneurialism and finding market opportunities and making the best of them, isn't it? It looks like that's what your company does a fair bit. Before we move on from
I'm listening to you. I was wondering if I agree or not. I think I do.
Actually,
I think I do.
Do correct me because I'm just sort of. No, I've had a couple of beers.
It's just sounding off now. And...
Yeah.
No, I think I do. I think it's a good analogy, and but what we all need, I think, is company like us, and that's what we do really. That make people realize, and people really tends to be people outside our industry, that you cannot rely on Vodafone and Nokia to
for everything.
For everything.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
Yeah.
And we do. I see that as our mission to do that as well.
And before we move on from talking about your company specifically, are there any other things that you'd like us and our audience to know about Boldyn? Any recent developments? Any cunning plans you got? Anything like that?
No, I think we've done a good tour about some of the exciting projects that we do around the world in the different verticals. Sorry, one more time. Some of the exciting things we do from from in terms of connectivity and one thing we didn't discuss, and we're quite proud of that, and actually it's excited quite a bit of our, it's going to sound soft, but it's excited quite a bit of our people. We also do a lot of things to bridge the digital divide. When we talk about New York and what we do and the free Wi-Fi, I mean, there are 2 million people in New York that have no access to broadband. They have access to that. We have Gigabit Center, for example, where people can come and have access to a laptop. They have for that because we have fiber in this building. What we do in Sunderland, and I would really invite you to see what our connectivity does in healthcare, does in
Remind
terms
me
of
what
the
you're
city.
doing in Sunderland.
So it's really the vision of the city to be the best digital city. So we have a lot of use cases around that. That's one of our major projects in the UK. So there is a lot of what we do that also makes a difference to people's life. And by the way, are not there to make money, and for that matter, they don't.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said, with my usual caveats about being largely hostile to the state. There's a lot to be said if you're going to spend public money, and God knows we waste public money on all sorts of bollocks. I think spending it on publicly available connectivity is an incredibly good and benign use case. And obviously, you can point to all sorts of multiplier effects in terms of it improving productivity and And even if the state wants to be completely self-interested, if people are more productive, then they earn more money, which produces more tax and all that sort of thing. So it just seems like such an obvious thing.
Have you been to Sunderland before?
I haven't.
I've never been to Sunderland.
And you should.
But I assume
it's an amazing city.
Yeah. I mean, I'll make certain...
I've never been to the northeast, really.
Well, exactly. I'll make certain ignorant southerner sort of generalisations about that part of the country and assume it's all a little bit run down. But I'm very happy to be corrected on those assumptions.
It's a difficult area, and that's why the city had a vision, and by the way, with money coming from the government as well, to invest in that, and obviously this investment are also to bring companies to Sunderland because they know there is great connectivity. But if you look at the public services over there, what they've done with the network we deploy, if you look at the health services that they provide with the network we deploy, I mean, it's really exciting, really exciting.
I'll tell you a classic example of what I was just banging on about is we've got this thing for non-English listeners called HS2. HS stands for high speed, which
I know. Goes through my dad's back garden,
does it?
More or less.
So he's getting quite NIMBY about.
Oh, he's one of the sort of placard wavers.
Right.
He's
and anyway,
not a fan.
It's called high speed. In fact, it's especially funny being in a room with two Frenchmen in it. We've got this thing called high speed 2, and they've had this TGVs for about 50 years. In France, and I don't think our HS2 is any faster. It's probably slower than TGV.
I think it's slower.
Yeah. So we're a bit shit
anyway. Even if
so we're a bit shit at that sort of thing. In fact, France actually that's a real strength of France. Is civil engineering on the whole, isn't it?
We have that and nuclear power.
Yeah. So you're good at civil engineering. You're good at
the food.
You're at trains and nukes,
and that's about it.
And red wine
and the football.
What have the French ever done for us? But that famously, we're spunking just stupid amounts of money in this HS2.
Yeah, the thing that my dad's really upset about is he'll never be alive to see it run anyway.
Right.
He's like, what do I get out of it? It's not going to open for another 10
I have
years,
to see
20
it
years.
creep past his back garden. But I just think that money, the tens, hundreds of billions, however much we're throwing at it, what if we're throwing that money at like public connectivity projects? That strikes me as a better sort of ROI.
Yep.
But there we are.
Isn't it that the HS2 is only going to cut it's going to be like 10 minutes faster? Or something?
Or maybe half an hour quicker to
I think the plans
Birmingham.
have been reined in since it was initially announced. It was supposed to be much more ambitious, but they've cut it, and even though the costs have gone up.
And it was originally going to go to Manchester as well, and then they
and you have to travel a long way out of King's Cross to actually get onto it in the first place because they're not building the final section to.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah. So you have to go about 3 or 4 miles.
So it's not like getting the Eurostar or something like that.
Which in itself, that 3 or 4 mile trip will gobble up a few minutes, and then you change and get onto the actual connection.
It's like the line in Saudi Arabia, the line that was going to be 70 kilometers. Now they're like, we're actually going to do just 7.
Didn't know about that. What was this like?
And normally they just
the thing that was going to
blow
be
it out the
the
water.
City, the line that was going to be like.
I don't know anything about this.
Well,
that's not like them because I mean, say what you want about the Middle East. They will normally chuck money at something because they've got plenty of it, isn't it?
It was like
money to use.
A skyscraper tall and 70 kilometers long. How can you even build anything like that? Yeah.
What, just
and
an
covered in
incredibly
mirrors.
Elevated rail track or something?
There'll be one track to travel, and then there'll be like apartments on the side.
It's a city.
Yeah.
Oh, we see.
Neom.
Yeah.
Neom, no, I don't know.
And they cut it down to like 10%.
Right, so even the Saudis were like, well, this is getting pricey.
I can't remember his name now, but he used to be Ofcom as a CTO, and he was at EE before that. He's at Neom, isn't he? What's his name?
That's right.
I'm annoyed that I've forgotten his name, but he's
I'll give it.
Neom. Yeah.
Now that you ask me. But,
he used to be at quite a few light reading conferences in the day.
Yes.
No, they're
can't
both.
remember his name. I'll look it up later.
Is it
Mansour.
Mansour.
Yeah.
Aha.
Yeah.
I provided the M.
Yeah.
We got there.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's great. But yeah, that final thought. I mean, not with perhaps catalyzed by my recent trauma in Venice. I'm all for much more investment in connectivity, and I think trivialities aside, like me putting up pictures on Facebook of me on a gondola. That's not really what it's about.
I think it is.
Well, yeah. Well, that's what it was about for me. But I mean, the bigger picture, I think one of the reasons why I think this comparison with HS2 is particularly relevant, we're at an era now, especially post-pandemic, where a hell of a lot of business is done remotely, even like commercial visits that you'd normally do face to face. I mean, you tell me you're in a position where presumably you're doing deals and you typically want to do them face to face.
Ideally, yeah, but we've made acquisition during pandemic without meeting people.
Yeah, well, there
which
we
is
go.
incredible. Yeah.
So
Something we
even
thought we would
business
never
at
do.
the CEO level is being done a lot more remotely now than it was even 5 years ago. So it just strikes me that if you're going to invest in infrastructure, that comms infrastructure versus rail or whatever, or even roads makes a lot more sense. So there we are. I hope you're listening, the government. Let's just move on to one or two news bits. I mean, one I wanted to bring up. I normally save the Scott Pacino self-indulgent one to the last, but then when I mentioned it before we started recording, Ian seemed quite interested in banging on about it. And so I'm going to elevate
I'm not
it.
sure I wanted to bang on about it, did I?
That's all you do. You just bang on about stuff. Can't ever shut you up. That's why this podcast's so long. He looks at me. It's not my fault. It's his fault. Is net neutrality, which is
Love net neutrality.
which is a funny concept. It's been around for so long, and it seems to mean so many different things to so many people. But before we get into perhaps a broader debate about the pros and cons of the concept, just wanted to talk about the actual news, which sort of broke yesterday in the States, but I wrote it up this morning.
Yeah, so I don't even know what the news is.
Yeah. So basically,
I can guess.
You can guess. Well, so I'll tell you what I know you don't edit the stuff that comes from the States, so you'd be forgiven for not knowing this. But on your own site, Ian, like reading,
I know.
Your colleague Nicole Ferraro wrote, FCC passes net neutrality order again for now, which I thought was a great headline because it sums it up. And what it really is it's been like a sort of political hot potato. In fact, I didn't even realise till I wrote the story that it only became a political hot potato under the Obama regime. Yeah. So in the States they have the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. Mm-hmm. Oh, we're getting a little. He just wants to roll. Oh no, I'm not going to do a cheesy grin. They have 5 commissioners in it. It's not like Ofcom where you've just got sort of permanent lot. That in the States, almost everything's politicised, and when you get a change of regime, you get a total changing of the guard, and everyone is sort of, quote, partisan is the word they use in the States, and they mean it in a slightly more narrow sense than we do, and they don't mean it in a pejorative sense. Here, if you say someone's partisan, it means that you think they're incredibly biased and unbalanced in their approach. There, it just seems to be baked into public life there that everyone is partisan. Everyone's either affiliated to the Democrats or the Republicans. Yeah. And this goes to, like, for example, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has 9 judges, and right now they call it 6-3 because 6 of them were nominated by Republican presidents and 3 of them by Democrat presidents. So the assumption is that Supreme Court judgments are now going to be more conservative. That's not always the case, but that's the assumption. And anyway, in the FCC, they have 5 commissioners who are the most senior people who seem to make all the decisions. And they're always split, where 3 of them are nominated by the party in power and 2 of them by the party not in power. And so you get these decisions made. And obviously, the reason to have an odd number is so that you never get a stalemate, you never get a draw. And so and they always vote along.
So the government in power always has
the majority. Yeah, always has 3.
Hence it just switching from one thing to the other.
And they always vote along, quote, partisan lines. Yeah. So if something is a Democrat policy, the 3 Democrat commissioners, that the chairperson's called Jessica Rosenworcel. I can't remember the other 2.
Brendan Carr.
Brendan Carr's one of the other team. Who will come on to him.
So there's 5 of them, and he's on the other team.
Yeah, he's on the other team. I think the other one. Anyway, and
he's Arsenal.
Yeah, and she's Spurs.
As far as you're concerned,
and
the other way around.
Yeah, well, as far as I'm concerned, anyway, it doesn't matter. You're confusing me. So anyway, net neutrality, which loosely, which loosely, well, it means different things to different people. My interpretation of it is it means a set of guardrails and regulations that means that internet service providers can't favour one recipient of internet service over another. And it's become a sort of...
Which is quite woolly in itself.
It's quite woolly. And, and there's a part of me that thinks, well, why shouldn't they? I mean, commercially, I don't think companies like Boldyn do this, but even if they did, if you had a commercial arrangement, let's say you set up a neutral host environment like on the tube, and I'm not saying you do all this. This is just me setting up the hypothesis to illustrate net neutrality. And you've got your thing in the tube, and you've got it at King's Cross Station, and it's theoretically available to everyone. But your business arrangement was such that you offered a superior service to EE subscribers over Vodafone subscribers. My personal position is that that's just a business thing. That's just, you and your partners have invested the money and the time and the effort and the risk to do that thing, and the reason you do it is to then capitalise on that investment afterwards. But anyway,
but that to me is a problem with the definition that you've come up with, and it's not
possibly quite inaccurate.
Your definition.
Yeah.
It's so woolly, even in legislature, that it can mean different things to different people. And it's not just me saying this. I mean, I remember being out at a press conference with Andrea Donner from Vodafone complaining that the rules on net neutrality were so hazy that they weren't sure what they could do in terms of providing specialised services with standalone 5G. This idea that you give someone a network slice that's slightly better.
Yeah,
and it's not just a really good point. Upset lots of operators.
How does network slicing work with net neutrality?
And Ofcom's actually changed the rules on net neutrality recently. I don't know if it's that they've gone through past the proposal stage, but they certainly came out with a paper that I wrote about a few months ago about relaxing a lot of the rules around net neutrality to give operators more leniency to do some of this stuff. Because if you interpret it in the way that the fanatics want it interpreted, the kind of real sort of extremists who go around sort of threatening to blow you up if you don't go along with them, then you wouldn't be able to do anything.
You're not really selling anything. You're just
slightly different.
You're just pure utility.
And it would even extend to the point, and actually there've been court cases happening with this in Europe, where Deutsche Telekom, I know, has been in court over things like you get a Deezer subscription and you can use as much Deezer as you want that month. But if you use Spotify and it goes over 50 gigabytes, it's kind of zero rating, but it's a nuance because you could use it up to a certain level, and then over that Deezer we're going to charge you on your data allowance. But because we've got an agreement with Spotify, then you don't. Now they've been in trouble for that, which I think is really kind of taking it to quite an extreme level. I think,
and this did come up when in the context of zero rating and podcasts gone past, and again I was just like, well, why shouldn't you? Because I actually think this is different. Net neutrality, as I understand it, is the flow of the data, and so they say that your ISP shouldn't be able to, outside of the tiers that they charge, the transparent tiers, like you buy a one gig service or 100 megabyte service or whatever. They shouldn't be able to, in a more clandestine way, sort of throttle some people and favour other people. But then zero rating, I always thought was a completely different thing. That's about billing. That's not about the service itself. It's just about what you're charging for the service, which I thought was quite a different thing.
Of throttling, which sounds like you've done something particularly restrictive, which is where it came from, I think, because I think originally it was Comcast trying to block Vonage back in the days when Vonage was a voice over IP company, saying we're not going to allow you to put your service on our network, which is obviously a very extreme breach of. I mean, there wasn't. I think that was handled by competition law. This is the people who push back on the need for net neutrality, say a lot of these things can actually be handled by normal competition law. But that's quite different. Some people would say throttling is just if you have a dedicated lane that allows you to do this, and there's another lane that's much. It's like Tesco's saying we're opening up this fast track service here for some people that you can go down and check out a lot more quickly. But the net effect is because there's a finite amount of capacity in a Tesco store, as there is
necessarily throttles everyone else.
It necessarily throttles everybody else. So even though you might not say it's not presented as throttling, you are by implication kind of throttling other people. But I think that to me is taking it to a bit of an extreme level, because a lot of these high capacity networks nowadays anyway have so much on them that you can maybe it might not be 5G, but certainly fibre in the ground. Well, you can talk more about that. I don't know.
So do any of these sorts of issues affect your day job, Igor?
I don't think it does. And obviously the principle of what we do is we need these networks are open to everyone, right? I mean, so, the example you gave is obviously not necessarily a good example. And I believe, I don't know, legally, I don't believe, by the way, we would be allowed to do, not that we would, but we'd be allowed to say, well, we do not want to give access to a certain suppliers. Obviously, there needs to be a commercial agreement for us.
Yeah, but
for us to do
hypothetically,
that.
hypothetically, I'm not saying you would do it, and I'm not asking you to comment on whether you do.
Yeah.
But for me, hypothetically, if you wanted to have a tiered billing system between the operators where they could pay you more for a better service, as far as I'm concerned, that'd be your business. But net neutrality sometimes pokes its nose in and goes, no, you're not allowed.
In the same way that I can decide to go for a certain speed on my fiber and I pay more if I want, if I want more. And, if I need to deploy more spectrum for an operator in the tube because that's what they want, again, potentially that'll cost more money and therefore that'll be different, and that will give them an advantage or not.
But that's a problem with the whole idea of net neutrality to me anyway, because people do pay for higher speed services. You pay for
and that's all right. No one's moaning about that.
I've got a fibre to the home connection. I haven't got a fibre to the home connection. What am I talking about? I've got a fibre to the curb and then copper connection with OpenReach, and on the you can get different packages.
Yeah, I do have fibre to the home, and I had the choice on
up to whatever
packages,
it is.
I think.
Yeah.
You should get Neil to hook up 40 gigs to your house himself.
I don't think they've done it in my
That was
area.
some of the in the podcast we did last week. There was some good anecdotes from Neil, because he's such a telecoms geek that he actually just rigged up his own fibre network to himself. Almost just like getting a shovel and laying fibre to his house. That was a good anecdote. So bring it back to the US thing.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing about what's happening there is a lot of what we've just been talking about, they seem to have circumvented. It used to be the sort of things we've been talking about, slightly esoteric, conceptual things like, when is it fair for something that could be viewed as a utility to offer differential services? And also, I mean, where I perhaps would argue in favour of net neutrality regulation is to certainly insist on transparency, i.e., not doing it on the sly. If people are getting a superior or inferior service, it should be transparent. That I probably would argue in favour of, but. In the US, it's just become more political. Like, I was banging on about everything being all partisan, and so they've got 3 Democrat-nominated commissioners and 2 Republican ones, and the decisions nearly always split along partisan lines. And what I found really interesting about this one is, the chairperson, Rosenworcel, what was it? So yes, firstly, the press release went, today's decision to reclassify broadband service. So this is all about broadband, yeah? As a Title II communication service, which basically means that they treat it more like a utility.
That means it's more heavily regulated.
Yes. So I think it's currently Title I. Yeah.
Which is less.
Title III is just like you can't do anything. No, I don't know if Title III exists.
That's security systems or something.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, why do they have to use abstract things like that when it's all a bit legalistic? Allows the FCC to protect consumers, defend national security and advance public safety. So I think that's a really interesting thing. They've kind of shifted the goalposts. It used to be about sort of fairness of service delivery, but now the 3 cardinal things they're talking about, which, as I said in my piece, you could almost merge into one. Protect consumers, defend national security and advance public safety. So all 3 of them are basically safety. Now, me, with my sort of jaded, classical liberal, etc., Pierre, position is
he's done it again.
Yeah. No, I do it now. It's just a joke. Whenever I refer to myself in that way, I always give Pierre a nod. He
always says that every podcast. He always uses that word.
It comes up.
Too late today to doing it then.
I was late. Well, no, it nearly always comes up in my self-indulgent segment at the end, actually.
No.
When you're like me and skeptical of the government, whenever they say they're doing something in the name of public safety, you get a bit suspicious, because that's the standard, that's the default justification for increasing state power and thus reducing liberty, is in the name of safety. Now, obviously, there has to be some kind of equilibrium there. There has to be some safety. You can't have, if you had anarchy, you'd in principle have no government constraint on your behaviour, but you actually wouldn't be very free at all, because you'd have to deal with nutters and opportunists.
It would be like The Walking Dead.
Yeah, and parasites and predators and all that sort of thing. So you obviously do need a state and you do need a government. So the useful discussions about the size, Fallout, which I've been watching. But this just seems like an example of them trying to increase their power. And then you look at what Rosenworcel actually said, and it was basically littered with rhetorical fallacies. So one of her favourite one was ad populum, which is an argument, rhetorical fallacy, which talks about invoking sort of public opinion rather than evidence. And so she goes, let's start with consumers. They spoke out in droves when this agency repealed net neutrality. So actually, just to backtrack quickly, so they had this net neutrality when Obama was in. He was the one who first politicised it. And then Trump came in and went, nah, we're not having this. And his commissioner was this chap called Ajit Pai. And they were like, no, bollocks to net neutrality. So then they got rid of it. And now the Democrats have brought it back in. So it's a bit of a sort of ping-pong, a political ping-pong with this. So she goes...
I find it quite strange, the whole way it's split between Republicans and Democrats, the way that it is anyway.
They're far too politicised.
I mean, I get it with Trump. I think the whole way that I don't think it is this anymore, but it originally got seen as a battle between the over-the-top players, as they used to be called, and the telcos, because... the over-the-top players, the idea was they want as much freedom as they want and they don't want the risk of being throttled.
That's right. Mm-hmm. And then there was also a worry that they would get too much priority over everyone else.
Well, this is why I think it's evolved, because back in the day when it came around, people like Google and Amazon and Netflix, which dominate the internet now, weren't really there. So, but the point was that it was, it was, if you were for it, you were kind of on the side of the internet companies, and if you were against it, you were on the side of the telcos, because it gave them more freedom to do what they want.
That's definitely one of the dichotomies.
And therefore, I sort of get why someone like Trump would be in the position that he is, because he hates the internet companies, doesn't he? He can't stand Amazon, and he thinks they're all a bunch of sort of lefty liberals. So
hates them all as much as the media.
And they ban him on their social media sites and all this stuff. But apart from him, I don't quite get why the battle
more
lines.
Broadly, if you're going to really reduce this down to like traditional political divides, and I said this in my piece, traditionally political leftists are sort of more pro large state and extensive state intervention, and traditional rightists are more laissez-faire, to use a nice French term. Another one we got. One. We were joking earlier. We were like, "What's French?
Really nice one.
What's French for?"
You were saying
I feel like I've been here before.
Rendezvous any minute.
Yeah, I start sounding like Del Boy. Rendezvous, Rodney. But I say traditional because I think political rightists on the whole right now, like the Republicans in the States and the Conservatives here, don't behave like rightists at all. They're just as big state as the leftists are. So there's nothing much to choose between them. But that's a tradition. And that seems to be the broad ideological lines of this, is the leftists want more state control over the internet to protect us from whatever imagined horrors there are. And the rightists want to be more laissez-faire and say, just let them do their thing and let's not poke our fucking nose in. That's supposed to be that what it is, and that's how it's positioned. I think it's a bit disingenuous from the Republicans because they don't actually behave like sort of traditional conservatives or libertarians or what we consider right-wing people as far as I go. But you were asking why it's split that way. That's the broad political ideology. And so Jessica Rosenworcel had this all ad populum stuff. That goes, they spoke out in droves when this agency repealed net neutrality. They jammed our inboxes, overwhelmed our online comment system, and clogged our phone lines. They clamoured to get net neutrality back. You can see why this isn't. This
very
isn't
alliterative, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not a rational. It's not. There's no evidence there. It's just a sort of look. Take it from me. This is what people want. And she sort of went on, and then there were a few other nice little fallacies she came in. Like I said that's all fair enough, but if there was evidence of ISPs doing the things we're told consumers are so concerned about, surely Rosenworcel would have presented it. In its absence, this argument has to be viewed as a straw man, which for people who don't know
you
is a
nail
fallacy.
On the head.
Yeah,
because the problem with the backwards and forwards and the yo-yoing from like we're reimposing it when we're having regulation around it or we're not doing is that it actually hasn't made any difference at all to the direction of travel.
Really good point.
It's not done a huge amount in terms of what it means the telcos are doing on the investment side, and it's not done a huge amount in terms of making the internet a more diverse place. It
hasn't probably affected it one way or the other.
Because it might have had a minor impact, but the problem is that it's a red herring, really. I mean, there are much bigger forces at work that are far more important in terms of why the internet's not as diverse as it used to be, and it's got very little to do with net neutrality, actually. And
I pretty much agree with that. So that's the straw man, which is a subset of the red herring fallacy family.
I hate to mention him because we have brought him up a few times, but that's actually been John Strand's point, I think, in the past, that net neutrality, like when you try and enforce it, it hasn't really done much in terms of what it's supposed to do. It hasn't really made a difference. But
do you know what? That's a good point. With this thing that's just happened here, it'd be a great time to chat to Rosalind again.
Well, that she's
so if you're listening, John or Rosalind, she's
an expert on that.
Yeah, she's an expert on this stuff. So, and she might think that we're talking total shit on this, and she can come on and correct me.
But I happen to agree with her on a lot of the stuff on net neutrality. Where I don't agree with her is on the fair share stuff, which is related to it. But
no, I think you and I,
position on that.
as with so many things, largely agree. And then I said. And then lastly, I said, warming to her fallacious theme, she moved smoothly to combine an appeal to emotion with an argument from anecdote, two more fallacies. So an appeal to emotion. So, for people who aren't as geeky about rhetorical fallacies as I am, the point of them is that they're a way of not addressing an argument directly. So, if I say something like, Brewdog's the best pale ale, and then you go, well, you would say that because you're wearing a Download T-shirt. You've got a sort of straw man and an ad hominem, and you're distracted. What you're not doing is you're not addressing the merits of my argument. And appeal to emotion's another one. Is like if I said Brewdog's the best beer, and you go, well, it's not because it upsets me to think about that. That's an appeal to emotion, or appeal to emotion is more often done to a crowd where like a demagogue will try and like Trump will try and whip up a crowd on a wave of emotion rather than actual sort of logic and reasoning. And an argument from anecdote is a classic one where you go, well, Brewdog's not the best because I spoke to someone the other day who liked something else. So that's an anecdotal example, but it's not in any way conclusive. So she managed to combine two of them where she talked about the Santa Clara County Fire Department, which apparently claimed to have been obstructed from fighting fires by the throttling of the internet connection to one of its command vehicles. So again, all of these, it sounds like I'm having a go, and I am. But the reason I'm having a go is because I think the arguments she put forward are just incredibly weak.
Well, that sounds like a very spurious one. That.
Yeah.
What? Someone throttled a firefighter's connection.
They reckon. And so that's why we need to change the law. I know it's very weak.
Because someone was using Netflix or something, and I don't
quite.
That's just.
But this is in a, you can look it up on the FCC site. This is in her public statement on the matter.
All right.
And anyway, and what I reckon is really going on here is part of the broader thing that's been going on in the States to do with national security, like banning.
I mean, that. By the way, that example you just given is a reason not to have net neutrality. It almost proves the point because you could say the firefighter that their department should have priority over other internet services.
Is that allowed?
On the grounds of
Are you allowed it in that
direction? It's so much more important that we should absolutely ensure that's a guaranteed service. That's actually an argument against her position.
Well, they'd probably argue that that's all right. That not net neutrality is all right in that direction. Anyway, and yeah, I thought the national security angle was interesting because we've been writing for years about them banning Huawei and ZTE in the States and putting pressure on their allies like us to do the same. And then, as we've spoken about lots of times on this pod, and there seems to be new developments about this every week, we've got this now trying to starve China of the latest chip technology.
ZTE's results are out today, incidentally.
Oh, right. I didn't check them out. Are they any good?
Robert wrote it up for us. I think it's like 3% growth. It's pretty flattish results.
Okay.
Quite not too dissimilar to Huawei.
But they're ticking along.
Well, they're very much like, the same way that Huawei's kind of boosted by China, still building lots of 5G stuff in a way that isn't happening elsewhere. They kind of rely on that, I think.
Yeah. Well, so when they talk about national security, I mean, in the States for a long time, like historically, at least post-Cold War, another way in which the state would increase its power by saying, we've got to protect you from the Russians. And during the height of the Cold War, no one was really questioning it because there was this nuclear arms race and everyone's shitting themselves and they're thinking, fucking hell, let's protect them. And now increasingly it's China that's the big bogeyman, notwithstanding the Ukraine conflict, of course. And that's why we've had things like the Huawei stuff, and more recently we've got things like TikTok, the ByteDance, and they just passed a law saying that they got to divest. They can't be Chinese owned anymore.
That's actually in law now, is it?
Yeah. I think Biden just signed it off.
It's 9 months, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, mate. And anyway, and Rosenworcel leaned heavily on that as well, and talking about how China's a big threat, and that's why you need the FCC to protect you. And so what I read into all of this, and I won't read it out now, but Carr, one of the dissenting commissioners who came up earlier, I mean, he kind of summed up how I perceive it. He goes, here's a quote from him. Title II is now a matter of civic religion for activists on the left, he said. They demand the FCC go full Title II whenever a Democrat is president. This also explains why the FCC has never been able to come up with a credible reason or policy rationale for it. It's all shifting sands, and that's because the agency is just doing what it's been told to by the executive branch, i.e. the president, and cobbling together post hoc rationalizations as it goes along, which is consistent with my observations about the weakness of Rosenworcel's argument. They're basically just going, yeah, well, what about the fire department? That's an example of his post hoc rationalizations that he's talking about. Anyway, what I concluded was that they're basically the state just wants more control over the internet in the States. And, something I've covered a lot in the area of censorship is politicians become increasingly worried about a loss of control over the public domain in terms of discourse. Typically 2016, they really shat themselves because there were two big electoral shocks that happened then, Brexit and Trump. And there was initial blame. I don't know if you remember Cambridge Analytica scandal to do with Facebook. There've been lots of attempts to say, if we don't control things like social media and the internet more, then the baddies are going to win. Two examples of baddies being Brexit and Trump, apparently. And I think this is what's really going on here, and that's why the whole dialogue has changed from the traditional net neutrality stuff we were banging on about earlier to this very much more security focused stuff. Because as I said, that's the default way in which the state justifies increasing its power over individuals is in the name of security, and they're just basically going, we need more power over broadband to protect you from those nasty scheming Chinese. Seems to be what they're saying. So yeah, it's interesting.
I think it's curious what's going to happen in Europe, because it's more of a political issue in the US, but it's up for debate in Europe, and it often gets partly because of this whole fair share dispute, I think, which is the same issue to some extent. And
do you think it's the same issue?
It's the same issue in the sense of you shouldn't block, throttle or discriminate between different types of internet traffic. So if you're saying that 5 big internet companies should pay for their internet traffic but everybody else shouldn't, then you're immediately getting into problems.
That's where the overlap is. Yeah, I hear you.
That's the problem with it. And if you talk to, we can't name them because they were talking to us on background, but we know this happened because we were both there. If you talk to the telcos about this, certain telcos, they will say, well, we've spoken to our lawyers and we're quite confident that the current net neutrality legislation in the European Commission doesn't need to change to support a fair share environment where we're allowed to charge certain internet companies for use of our networks. But if you talk to the internet companies, they say, our lawyers say the complete opposite. So all this is really good for, actually, is lawyers, which is actually the way the world works.
Lawyers and politicians. I mean, that's what I feel.
It's euros not spent on the networks, as far as I'm concerned. So.
Yeah, exactly.
But I suppose,
but I get the point. I do understand this concern that we have, which really ties in with the big theme that I see in the industry at the moment, which is it's not growing. Companies like Ericsson and Nokia are worried about not being able to sell enough equipment. That's what they do to stay in business. And, the telcos don't want to spend money on the equipment because their own sales aren't growing. So they're trying to cut back. This is very much a theme of the moment. And, and therefore I see where this argument comes from, that we need to find alternative revenue sources. And I think this is one of the reasons there's so much interest in this whole concept of network APIs at the moment. It's another attempt to try and monetize what's going on.
Yeah,
but I think that's a better way of doing it, or looking at other pricing models than saying let's try and get the internet companies to pay money for. I just think that's a bit. It's just very. It gets you into all sorts of philosophical problems. And, it's like saying. I think William Webcke said this on the pod, but I think he actually got it from me originally because I put it in an article years ago. It's like a bookshop saying, we're going to get J.K. Rowling to pay us money because demand for her books has caused loads of wear and tear in the store.
Yeah, I think even more broadly, it does come down to what I was banging on about earlier, a sort of heavily regulated versus laissez-faire thing. And perhaps in telecoms, more than any other industry, that balance is really delicate. because obviously you need regulation of telecoms because there's such a high barrier to entry. It's not like we could, well, maybe Igor could, but it's not like the rest of us could just decide to start up some kind of national telecom service, just on the back of our credit cards or something like that. The sort of garage startup type of thing.
What one way it could be addressed is through taking it all the way back to neutral hosts and stuff, is to have different models in the industry, and that's where I'm kind of sympathetic towards the Vodafone 3 argument about a merger, or the idea that Europe is a bit too restrictive on M&A activity. I think it's clear. The point's quite clear that you've got three big operators in China and a market of 1.4 billion people. You've got three big operators in the US and a
India,
market of I don't know what it is at the moment, 350, 400 million or whatever. But that's right, it's very fragmented in Europe, and any M&A that gets done tends to get enormous what they call them, remedies attached to it. You have to give some spectrum to Iliad of all people that's going to come in and charge £5 for a month for
who was still better than Vodafone in Venice. I was at least getting HSPA Plus with them.
I forgot they were. Yeah, I forgot they were there. Of course, they're there.
I'm so sad. I even took a picture of like a couple of ones. And
you really are a
telecoms
nerd.
Well, you know what? When you be doing this,
you were doing a roaming assessment.
I took a picture of shop fronts of.
Honey, this is not a romantic gift.
You know what I mean?
This is a roaming assessment.
Exactly. I took a picture of a shop front of Tim and a shop front of Windtray, the ones I saw, and I took a picture of a tower with some macro cells on them. That's very sad, isn't
That's
it?
pretty sad, especially the last one.
Tragic.
How do you even see HSPA on the phone?
I know, that's what I was thinking.
You just see H+.
I don't see H+. I've never seen that.
I don't see that on my phone.
Yes, you see the H thing.
Yeah,
I've not seen that for a long time. But
I just see 4G.
H plus retro.
Yes,
I only ever see 4G or 5G these. I don't even see 3G now. I think actually 3G's gone, hasn't it now?
Yeah, if you want a retro mobile experience, go to Venice, mate. That's for fucking sure. It's that broader, and we'll wrap it up in a sec. And I know, Igor, we've gone off on sort of tangents, which aren't necessarily your core area, but it's that regulatory balance. You need to have some regulation because it's that high barrier to entry to become a network operator or whatever. And presumably you are subject to some amount of regulatory constraint in what you do.
Of course, yeah.
Things like rights of way and all this stuff is a massive concern for Boldyn. Like just being able to sort of go. People are always complaining when they build infrastructure about access to properties and this sort of thing.
And one of the things in our sort of work, safety as well. Safety regulation, just enormous in the subway environment, as you could imagine.
Do you see massive differences between different countries on it? Like some, it's really easy to do, and others are like super restrictive. I'm not expecting you to say them, by the way.
I don't think so, but I mean, obviously, building in Rome, in a city like Rome, and in New York, is a bit difficult for it's a bit different for other reason than that. But I think
we're in Rome and fuck up some 2,000-year-old.
I went to the Ryder
relic.
Cup on a bit of a kind of journalist jolly. Come and watch the Ryder Cup because we're doing the infrastructure for it, which was HPE. They were doing the Wi-Fi, and the guys there who were like showing off the equipment, they were saying it was incredibly hard to build fibre anywhere because you just run into an archaeological
and that's
relic.
And that's the end of it. Yeah, same for the subway, which is one of the lines that's being built right now. It is delayed and will be connectivity is has been delayed because of that, right? So our work
maybe
is
that's
a bit
why I've
less of
got
that, of
to
course.
give Vodafone Italia some slack in Venice. Well, I would if Tim wasn't giving me 5G. But on the whole, you'd say, in Venice, you don't want to be going around Venice and see fucking masts and radios
That's why
everywhere.
you need a neutral host.
There we are.
Yeah, you definitely do there.
I think you've wrapped it up quite well there. That was a good way of bringing it back home.
I hope I did.
No, I think that's good. I think we'll call it a day there. So thanks a lot. Yeah, I don't think we mentioned it at the start, or maybe we did, but this is about our sort of third or fourth attempt.
That's right, yeah.
We each had to cancel for different reasons over the past, so it's great to get you in at long last.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. It was great fun.
Cool. All right, well...
I hope that the fact that I didn't drink any beer was okay.
Of
I
course.
hope you enjoyed my French beer, and I know you didn't want to share it, but please send me a message when you tried
the
it.
state of us if we've been getting through... I mean, that Chateauneuf du Pape's 14.5%. It's Côte d'Aron. Côte d'Aron tends to be like the strongest I've found of French wines.
It's about the same.
It doesn't take any prisoners.
No.
So, you know, if you
especially without any food.
Now,
so
yeah. If I'm talking shit now, imagine if I got through half a bottle of that, it could all gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
So, thanks a lot for coming in. It's great chatting to
Pleasure.
you. And thanks a lot for listening. And make sure you join us for the next one.